Hi everybody, I'm Steve. I'm an alcoholic. I'm a happy alcoholic in recovery. I am creating a series of videos chronicling my personal experience with the 12 steps of recovery. It's important to note right out of the gate that this isn't a sales pitch of any kind. I'm not trying to sell you anything. Don't need you to buy anything. Don't need you to click on any links or anything like that. I'm doing this in the sole hope that maybe these videos might help somebody who's new in recovery or is in recovery and is looking for someone's perspective on the 12 steps of recovery. I'm going to use alcoholism as the base addiction, but what I'm going to talk about applies to all addictions. In particular, I wanted to point that out because of the current opioid crisis that we see in the news all the time that's rampant around the world. So I'm going to use it in the context of alcohol. That's what I'm going to speak about. That's what my experience is, and it's based on the book Alcoholics Anonymous. But this can apply to opiates, crystal meth, LSD, shrooms, weed, sex, shopping, food, internet, whatever your addiction is, whatever your drug is, whatever your vehicle is that you're using to check out of reality and escape yourself, you can substitute that for alcohol in this context. Don't let the fact that this is based on a book called Alcoholics Anonymous keep you away from recovery if opiates are your thing. It's all the same in my experience. So I am definitely an alcoholic. And what that means to me is, and what addiction means to me is, I cannot control my consumption of alcohol when I consume it. Meaning that I don't get to choose when I'm going to drink and when I'm not going to drink. And when I do drink, I don't get to decide or choose how much I'm going to drink. I tried for years to control it, and I lost, and we'll get to that kind of in my story. But the hallmarks of addiction are powerlessness and unmanageability. I can't control it. It got the best of me. It caused a lot of suffering in my life, and despite my efforts to control it, I was not able to control it via my own mortal human methods. And so that's kind of what defines addiction, including alcoholism, is a lack of control, my lack of ability to control my drinking. Now, my story is that I started drinking and drugging when I was 15 years old. Long story short, I was an unhappy teenager. I'm not going to get into that big sob story. What's important there is that as a teenager, I was suffering inside. And when I discovered alcohol and marijuana at that time, it became my escape mechanism. It was the way that I checked out, and me and my crew of friends made it our new priority that every weekend it was going to be who's getting the booze, who's getting the weed, and whose house are we going to get as messed up as we possibly can. Didn't know any better. Didn't have a whole lot of parental supervision, and that's okay. And so that's where it started. And I partied all through high school, all through college, well into my 20s, and it became pretty much a priority. More drugs by the time I got into my 20s, more drugs had entered the picture. And kind of partying it was a priority, and I was doing things like blacking out, vomiting, really bad hangovers and things like that. And by the time I got into my 30s, it was a real problem. I was married by that time, and my now ex-wife, that marriage did not survive my alcoholism. My now ex-wife was in tears on a regular basis, begging me to do something about my drinking, blacking out regularly, throwing up regularly, calling in sick to work a lot was a big thing for me. I went to the emergency room a couple times, feeling so hungover from, alcohol and cocaine and painkillers and what have you. And twice I had emergency doctors in emergency rooms tell me, "You're an alcoholic. You need to go to Alcoholics Anonymous." And I wasn't ready then. But I was getting more and more sick physiologically. I wasn't eating right. I wasn't sleeping right. I was having liver issues, lots of health issues, but most of all, it was depression. The physical illness and the depression was really getting me down lower and lower and lower until finally one morning, the morning after, I had made a total ass out of myself at my best friend's wedding, in which I was a groomsman. It was really embarrassing, disrespectful, just a mess. I woke up that morning and I was so physiologically ill, depressed beyond belief, and my white flag went up, and I went to my first AA meeting, and that was in 2005. I had a couple slips early on in sobriety, and after my second slip, which was after the end of my second slip, which would have been June 10th, 2007, I got sober, and I picked up what's hopefully going to be my last white chip a little over 10 years ago on June 11th, 2007. So I've been sober and happy a little over 10 years now. And I don't say that to brag, I'm just saying that to demonstrate that the program works. So something that I want to point out quickly and importantly is that I'm going to refer to a program of recovery, the program of recovery. And the program of recovery, as I understand it in my experience, and as it has always been intended, is the 12 steps as they're outlined in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's the program of recovery. Working them with a sponsor. What the program of recovery is not is just not drinking and going to meetings. And you may have heard, or some people report back to me and they tell me that, well, it doesn't work. Alcoholics Anonymous doesn't work. My friend tried it, I tried it. Well, if you do a little research there, inevitably what you'll find is that if it didn't work for someone, they probably didn't work the 12 steps of recovery with a sponsor honestly and to the best of their ability. Some people may have the mistake of, well, I quit drinking and I went to meetings and nothing changed and it didn't work and I ended up going right back to drinking. That's because they didn't really work the program of recovery, which is the 12 steps as they're outlined in the big book. That's the nickname for this book, by the way. This book is called Alcoholics Anonymous, but it's commonly referred to in recovery as the big book. So what are the steps? The steps are, if a good way to describe them is, if you are so reliant upon your addiction, alcohol, drugs, whatever it is for you, to provide you with happiness, eventually it stops working and you hit your bottom with it. But if that's what you've been relying on for so many years to provide you with happiness and your escape, then if you stop doing that, you're going to need to replace it with something, and you're going to need to learn how to live a life that's happy and has serenity and joy and stuff like that without alcohol and without drugs. That was my goal when I got serious about recovery. It's not going to be enough for me just to not drink and drug. I want to learn how to have a happy, productive, useful, serene, joyful, fun life in recovery. That's what the steps are. Excuse me. And could you hand me my tea? Thank you very much. So that's what the steps are. They're a tool for learning how to live life, not just live life, but enjoy life in sobriety. And that's what we're going to go through in the subsequent videos. An important concept to understand if you're going to embark on working the 12 steps with a sponsor is the concept of action precedes understanding. Meaning that Don't try to figure them out. Don't try to psychoanalyze them. Don't try to think you're going to understand how they work before you actually do them. The great metaphor for this is the movie The Karate Kid. Daniel-san, he wants to win the karate championship, and he is taught by Mr. Miyagi, and Mr. Miyagi says, you know, wax on, wax off, and show me paint the fence, and show me sand the floor. And he does all these things, and he gets frustrated, and he doesn't know how it pertains to karate, and why am I doing these things? And he gets frustrated, but he's told just to do them, just to do them. And then when he gets to the tournament at the end, it kind of all clicks, and he's like, whoa, I get it now. And he uses all the, you know, the sand the floor and the paint the fence and the wax on. He uses those, and he realizes that's why I was doing all those things. It's not to figure out. It's only a program of action. It's all based on suggestions. So your sponsor is most likely going to say, I suggest you do these things. And he's probably never going to say, I suggest you read this book and give me your opinion on it, or try to figure out how and why it works. No, it's just a program of action. You do the things like Daniel did in The Karate Kid, and you get the results. And another thing about the 12 steps is that there's no graduation. It's important to understand that, because I've worked with guys and I've sponsored with guys, and it's very common to be in a rush to get to the end, like as if it's high school or something. And, you know, when am I going to be at the end? And when is this going to be done so I can be done with the steps? There's no rush to get through them, because there's no graduation from them. When you get to the end, you end up going back and using other steps in your life to apply to different life situations. And the steps are an ongoing set of principles that you incorporate in your life for as long as you want to stay sober. So don't think of it as there being an end to the steps, because they go on and on. Another thing to understand about, especially about this series of videos, if you choose to watch them, is that watching these videos does not constitute working the steps. That's important. I am not your sponsor, and just because you're watching these videos of me sharing my experience about when I work the steps doesn't mean that you're working them. This does not constitute working the steps. If you're going to go to meetings, which I hope you do if you are interested in recovery, then I want to debunk a couple of myths that I've heard out there about the program of AA or other 12-step programs. Alcoholics Anonymous is not religious. That has a tendency to kind of freak people out, and they might stay out of the halls thinking that it's a cult or it's a religion. It is absolutely not religious at all. As a matter of fact, it's specifically not religious. There is a lot of talk of a higher power of your understanding, which in the interest of brevity, they just refer to it as God a lot, especially in the big book. But it is not religious. There is no attendance taking. It's 100% voluntary. Everything is based on suggestions. There's no hierarchy. You get out of the 12 steps what you're willing to put in to the 12 steps. No one's going to force you to do them. No one's going to hold you accountable for you better do this or else. No one's going to say you better do this or you're going to be in trouble. There's no orders given. The whole thing is driven by your willingness to work the steps with your sponsor, who has worked the steps with his sponsor, and so on up the chain. There's no rules, no hierarchy, no attendance, no mandatory anything. It's 100% voluntary, based on your willingness, and the more willingness and the more effort you put into it, the more you're going to get out of it. And there's a saying in recovery that makes a lot of sense, especially if you're new and you're shopping for a sponsor. The saying is, if you want what we have, do what we do. And what that means is, if you go to meetings and you see a bunch of guys or women, it's suggested men with the men for sponsorship and women with the women. That's the suggestion for obvious reasons. That if you're looking for a sponsor and you're looking up to some guys in recovery and you're seeing that they're laughing and they have happy, useful, productive lives, maybe they're married, maybe they have careers, they're happy, they're going fun places, doing fun things, and they're doing it all in sobriety, and you see them and you say, I want that, that's the life that I want, then the saying is, if you want what we have, do what we do. And if you see those people at meetings, and maybe you might ask one of them to be your sponsor, what you're going to find inevitably is that these people that have these lives that are really positive and enthusiastic and productive and what have you, kind of resembling the life that maybe you'd like to have in sobriety, inevitably you will find that they have worked the steps and they have had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, which we'll get to. And that was my experience, and that's how I found my sponsor. And I thank God that I had the willingness back then to start working the steps, because I did it and it changed my life. And I am doing this series of videos hopefully to help, if I help one person get a different perspective on the steps, that changes their perspective and helps nudge them along in the steps or give them another sense of perspective on it. If I get to help one person in recovery, then it's totally worth it. And this is part of my 12-step work. And I want to share my experience with the world in efforts that it might help one person, it might help 100, it might help 1,000, who knows, I don't know. Or I could just get a bunch of heckling trolls, don't know. But I'm going to put it out there and we'll see what happens. And if you've watched up to this point, thank you for watching. So let's take a look at the steps.